Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. We are on the Salaam, and this next chapter about two people speaking in private to the exclusion of the third, if there are only three people in the room. From Abdullah, the Prophet said, إِذَا كُنْتُمْ ثَلَاثَةً فَلَا يَتَنَاجَ اثْنَانِ دُونَ الْآخَرِ حَتَّى تَخْتَلِطُوا بِالنَّاسِ مِنْ أَجْلِ أَنْ يُحْزِنَ. If you are only three, then two of you should not speak in private until you mix in with other people, because in doing so you would hurt the feeling of the third. This hadith gives the illah, or the justification as to why the ruling is what it is. If two people speak in private, then the third may think that they're only speaking in private because they're speaking about me. And this also includes speaking in a different language. So two people speaking in a language which the third does not understand, it carries the same ruling because the illah is the same. This hadith teaches us to be sensitive to others and to watch what you say, how you say, and when you say it. Question: does this hadith apply to a kafir? So if two Muslims and a kafir are in a room, can two Muslims speak to each other in a language that the kafir does not understand, or perhaps in secret with each other? The answer is that the hadith is general and it applies to all people, Muslims and kuffar. And we are talking about those kuffar who are not at war with you. Because making another person sad is a transgression against them, and you are not allowed to transgress against anyone who is to be respected and is not at war with you, or is not attacking you verbally or physically. And so what we understand from the hadith is that if there are four of you and two people speak in private, then this is okay. What the hadith is preventing us from is to exclude one person. Let's take a look at the next chapter about medication and illness and ruqyah. From Abu Sa'id, he said, Jibreel alayhi salam came to the Prophet and asked him, "Are you complaining of an illness?" Thereupon the Prophet said, "Yes." And upon that answer, Jibreel alayhi salam made a ruqyah on the Prophet, saying, Bismillahi arqiq, in the name of Allah I make ruqyah upon you, min kulli shay'in yu'dhik, from everything that will annoy you or harm you. Min sharri kulli nafsin, from the evil of every soul. Aw aynin hasidin Allahu yashfik, or a jealous eye, may Allah heal you from it. Bismillahi arqiq, in the name of Allah do I make ruqyah on you. We find that Jibreel alayhi salam is making ruqyah on the Prophet, and it is permissible to have ruqyah made on you. One might ask, why did the Prophet not say that there will be 70,000 who enter Jannah without any hisab, no adhab, and they are those people who did not seek ruqyah? But is Jibreel here not making ruqyah on the Prophet? The answer is that the Prophet did not seek ruqyah, rather that Jibreel himself offered to make the ruqyah. It is different from the Prophet going out of his way seeking ruqyah from Jibreel alayhi salam. So note the difference. Ruqyah needs to be done with words from the Quran or the authentic Sunnah, and there must be no shirk involved in it. It must be in a language which is understood, using Allah Jalla wa Ala's name, not the name of any false deity. And we find here that you can make ruqyah from the effects of the evil eye, as well as Jibreel said, Aw aynin hasidin Allahu yashfik. We find here Jibreel making ruqyah with the name of Allah Jalla wa Ala. As we said, this is what needs to be done if you are going to perform ruqyah. From the evil of every soul. This could be the human soul and a jinn soul. And the reason why it is better not to seek ruqyah yourself is because having tawakkul on Allah Jalla wa Ala is better. That is different from seeking medication. You can seek medication and it does not nullify your tawakkul. And the difference between medication and ruqyah is that a ruqyah is a weak cause, whereas medication is a strong cause. When we talk about cause, we're talking cause for your healing. And so with a weak cause like ruqyah, it is better not to seek it and to make tawakkul on Allah Jalla wa Ala. But for a strong cause like medication, then yes, you can seek it. In fact, it could be obligatory to seek it if your life is in danger and that medication could save your life. So ruqyah is permissible to be made on the condition that it uses the names of Allah Jalla wa Ala or His description, or perhaps it uses ayahs of the Quran or that which has been narrated in the hadith, such as this one. Secondly, it contains no shirk. Thirdly, that it must be in a language which is understood to extinguish the possibility of any shirky elements that people may not understand. And fourthly, the one making ruqya and the one on whom it is being done, they must believe that it is Allah Jalla wa Ala who heals, and not the words per se. Rather, the words are a sabab or a cause for the healing, and it is Allah who heals. It's the same thing when you take medication as well. Allah Jalla wa Ala heals, not the actual chemicals themselves. They are a sabab or a cause, such as when a child is born, the sabab or the cause for the child's creation are the mother and the father. But the creator is Allah Jalla wa Ala. So the parents are the cause, but the creator is Allah. Likewise, the medication is the cause, but the one who actually heals is Allah. Also in the chapter from Ibn Abbas, the Prophet said, Al-'aynu haqq, walau kana shay'un sabiq al-qadar, sabaqathu al-'ayn, wa idha istughsiltum faghsilu. The evil eye is true, and if there could be anything that could come before the qadr of Allah, the evil eye would have done so. And if you are asked to take a bath, then take a bath. Or if you're asked to wash, then wash. So what is this evil eye? Well, you have some sort of ni'mah, and another person feels secretly jealous or feels left out. And the result of this feeling is that you suffer some misfortune or calamity. Some ulama have said that if a person is beautiful, he should not increase himself in his beauty by putting on something that will beautify him even more. Rather hide the beauty out of fear that the evil eye could hit you. Also, it has been reported, if it is authentic, as the statement of Uthman ibn Affan, that he saw a child with a dimple on his chin, and that made the child look pretty. And he said, "Sawwidu nunatahu li'alla yusibahu al-'ayn." Blacken his dimple, so that the evil eye does not afflict him. Because this dimple could be on the chin, but it could also be on your cheeks when you smile. This could make a person look pretty or beautiful, and hence the danger is that the evil eye could afflict you. The Prophet is simply telling us that this concept of the evil eye is not just some sort of superstition, rather this is real. So much so that it could even have overtaken the qadr of Allah, if that were to be possible. Of course we know that's not possible, but if it was, then the evil eye would be number one contender. Is it possible to tell who has given you the evil eye? The answer is yes, sometimes it is possible. And a common means is that the one afflicted sees the one who has given him the evil eye in his dream. Sometimes you can just tell people who are jealous of you. What about this idea of taking a wash? Well, the answer is that the one who has given you the evil eye, he will wash himself, and with the water from which he has washed, it is poured over the one who is afflicted. And this is exactly what we find in the Muwatta of Imam Malik, where a Sahabi called Amir ibn Rabi'a passed by a man called Sahl ibn Hunayf, and he was taking a bath. And Amir ibn Rabi'a said, "I have never seen such beautiful skin before." And when he said this, Sahl ibn Hunayf fell in a convulsion. When the Prophet was told about this, he says, "Whom do you suspect?" And they said, "We suspect Amir ibn Rabi'a." And the Prophet says, "عَلَى مَا يَقْتُلُ أَحَدُكُمْ أَخَاهُ." Why does one of you kill his brother? He said, إِذَا رَأَى أَحَدُكُمْ مِنْ أَخِيهِ مَا يُعْجِبُهُ فَلْيَدْعُ لَهُ بِالْبَرَكَةِ. When one of you sees something about his brother which pleases you, then let him make dua of barakah for him. Then the Prophet ordered some water be brought, and ordered Amir ibn Rabi'a to make wudu. So he washed his face and hands up to the elbows, and he washed his knees, and he washed inside his izar. And this water was ordered that it be poured over Sahl ibn Hunayf. And then after, Sahl recovered. So this is the way to prevent the evil eye. If you see something in someone else that you like or pleases you and you feel left out, then make dua of barakah for that person. Repel your jealousy with the complete opposite. This is the medication. This is how it works. You repel the disease with its complete opposite. Antibiotics are given for bacteria because they are the complete opposite. They kill the bacteria off. Let's take the next chapter about the sihr or magic. It's a lengthy narration. Let's paraphrase it. Aisha reports that a Yahudi from Banu Zurayq by the name of Labid ibn al-A'sam afflicted the Prophet with a sihr. The effect was that the Prophet thought he was doing something when in fact he was not. So he was under this illusion. And one night the Prophet made dua for this condition. And he said to Aisha, "O Aisha, do you know that Allah has answered what I asked him?" He says that in his dream there came two men. One sat near my head, he says, and the other one near my feet. The one at the head said, "What is the trouble with the man?" The one at the feet said, "He is affected by sihr." The other said, "Who cast that?" And the other one said, "Labid ibn al-Asam." Then the other said, "What has transmitted the effect of this sihr?" Then the other one at the feet said, "The comb and the hair, which is stuck to the comb, and the spadix of the date palm." The first one asked, "Where is it?" The second replied, "In the well of the Arwan." That's the name of the well. Aisha says that the Prophet and some companions went to the well, and the Prophet said its water was like the yellowness of henna, and its trees were like the heads of devils. Then Aisha asked, "Why did you not burn the comb and the hair and the spadix?" And the Prophet said that Allah has healed me, and I disliked that people should be stirred by this event, but I only commanded that it be buried. So we find the Prophet is affected by sihr. One might ask, do the kuffar not claim, as in Surah Al-Isra, "In tattabi'una illa rajulan mashura"? You are only following a man who is affected by sihr. And upon this, some people rejected this hadith. They said that if we accept this hadith, then it means that the statement of the kuffar would in fact be true. We are following a person affected by sihr. But this is nonsense. The mushrikun are saying that you are following a person affected by sihr in that which he calls you to tawheed. But we know that is not the case. But as for sihr which somebody afflicts on you, then even the Prophet could be affected by it. And if the Prophet can be affected, then how about us? But this sihr that the Prophet was affected by has no bearing on conveying the message of Islam and of tawheed. The Prophet just buried this comb and the hair strand and the spadix of the date palm. He did not burn it. He did not want this news to become widespread, as this may encourage sihr amongst people. Note here, the Prophet did not take revenge on Labid ibn al-Asam, because this was a personal attack on him, and the Prophet does not take revenge on personal attacks. Rather, he takes revenge for attacks on the Sharia and on the rights of Allah Jalla wa Ala. And he did not want others to take revenge on Labid ibn al-Asam as well. That's why he just wanted to quietly get rid of this evil and just move on. We also take from the narration the hatred and jealousy that the Yahud had against the Prophet. This is the example of sihr. We also have the example of where the woman put poison in the meat which the Prophet ate. And other events when they tried to assassinate the Prophet, like when Banu Nadir did, but the Prophet was given revelation. وَلَا تَزَالُ تَطَّلِعُ عَلَى خَائِنَةٍ مِّنْهُمْ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا مِّنْهُمْ. You will not cease to find treachery amongst them, except only a few from them. The next chapter about poison. From Anas ibn Malik, he says that a Yahudiya came to the Prophet with poisoned mutton. The Prophet ate it, and when some effects of poison were found on him, he called the Yahudiya back, whereupon she admitted her crime and said, "I determined to kill you." And the Prophet said that Allah will never give you power to do it. The companions asked the Prophet, "Shall we not kill her?" And the Prophet said, "No." Anas says, I felt or I observed the effects of this poison on the uvula of the Prophet. Allah Jalla wa Ala tells the Prophet, "Wallahu ya'asimuka minan nas." Allah will protect you from the people. So the death of the Prophet is written. He will die when he is going to die. So the people cannot forestall the Prophet's death. He did die from the effects of the poisoning, but not when the Yahud wanted it. Only when Allah Jalla wa Ala willed it to happen. And again, just like the last narration, we find the jealousy, the hatred, the envy of the Yahud against the Prophet. And the Prophet in this narration as well does not take personal revenge. The Yahudiya who poisoned the Prophet, her name was Zainab bint Harith. The next chapter, making ruqya on the one who is ill. The first narration from Aisha, she says when the Prophet would make ruqya on someone with an illness, he would wipe him with his right hand and say, أذهب البأس رب الناس واشفي أنت الشافي لا شفاء إلا شفاءك شفاء لا يغادر سقما, which means, O Rabb of man, take the harm away and heal him, for you are the one who heals. There is no healing except your healing, a healing which does not leave off any illness. Then she goes on to say that when the Prophet was ill and his illness took a serious turn, I took hold of his hand and make a ruqya, but to make his hand rub his own body. But she says that the Prophet took his hand away from my hand and he said, Allahumma ghfirli waj'alni ma'a rafiq al-a'la. O Allah, forgive me and join me with the high companions. She says, I was gazing at him and he passed away. We learn from the narration that the Prophet says, أذهب البأس رب الناس. Take the harm or the illness away, O Rabb of the mankind. Washfi anta shafi. You are the healer. And this is one of the names of Allah Jalla wa Ala, which we find in this hadith. Ash-Shafi, the one who heals. So you can make dua to Allah Jalla wa Ala using this name, especially if you're asking for healing. We find it is legislated to make this dua, or any other dhikr for that matter, blow it on the hand and wipe it on the ill person. You can also do that to your own self, especially before you go to sleep. And this is all ruqyah, using the names and attributes of Allah Jalla wa Ala, so there is no shirk involved in this. We find there is no healing except the healing of Allah Jalla wa Ala. So it must not be believed that medicine produces the healing. Yes, medicine is a sabab, it's a cause, but the healing alone belongs to Allah Jalla wa Ala. Just like we say that ibadah alone belongs to Allah. Remember that Allah Jalla wa Ala creates, whether it be creating the healing or creating the baby in the womb or whatever it may be, but He uses mechanisms or asbab, causes to accomplish the creation. He will not just create out of thin air, even though if He wants to, He can do that. Maryam alayhi salam did not have a husband when she gave birth to Isa alayhi salam. All these scientific discoveries and studies, they study the mechanism or the asbab which Allah Jalla wa Ala uses. They do not study the agent behind these asbab. The agent, of course, being Allah Jalla wa Ala. We also find that making dua for the ill person is ihsan, doing good. And the best dua to make is the one that has been narrated, such as this one, and there are others. Can you ask another person to make dua for you? Well, the answer is, if you do, it is not sinful, but it is better not to ask people for anything, be it wealth or dua either. Because when you ask them, you're lowering yourself to them. And the Muslim does not want to lower himself to anyone. So we say it is not legislated to ask other people for dua. But if you do so, it is not haram. Ibn Taymiyyah says that if you do ask somebody to make dua for you, then you need to intend that it is for their own benefit, meaning the one making the dua. Because if you make dua for your brother, then the angels say, and the same be to you. So actually you are benefiting yourself when you make dua for others. And so Ibn Taymiyyah says that this is what you should intend if you ask somebody to make dua for you, that it is for their own benefit, not yours. Because if you intend it to be for your benefit, then you're lowering yourself, and this is not fitting. Do not ask others for anything as much as you can help it. So if you want to ask a righteous person to make dua for you because this is the way you want to make tawassul to Allah Jalla wa Ala, then we're not going to say it is haram. Indeed, Umar did it with Al-Abbas. But we are going to say that it is not to be encouraged. Also from the narration, the fadila of Aisha, in that the Prophet died on her lap and solely in her company. And we find the last words spoken by the Prophet, Allahumma ghafirli, oh Allah forgive me. And in another narration it says, Allahumma ghafirli warhamni wa alhiqni bil rafiqil a'la, and join me with the high companions. So this would be the malaika, the other prophets and righteous people of the past. Okay, here's a question. What if somebody gives another the evil eye, and let's say that person, the recipient, either dies or is injured? Is he entitled to the blood money or even qisas? The answer here is no. The blood money and the qisas is only for physical actions. The evil eye is not a physical action, and so does not carry the same ruling. And then, besides, you cannot be sure that it was exactly the evil eye which caused the destruction to life and limb, whereas with physical actions you can be sure. Next chapter about the mu'awwidhatayn. Aisha reports, when any member of the Prophet's family was ill, he would blow over them with the mu'awwidhatayn. The word nafath is when you blow out, emitting a little bit of spittle. She says, when he was in his illness from which he died, I made this nafath over him, but I wiped him with his own hand, because his own hands had more barakah than my hands. We find from this narration that the mu'awwidhatayn can be used to make ruqyah with for ill people. So you would recite the mu'awwidhatayn, you would make nafath on your hands, and then you would wipe it on the ill. And you also do the same thing before you go to sleep as well. We have evidence for this, to protect yourself from the evil jinn. The Prophet's hands were blessed? Yes, they were. But can we make an analogy and say that the hands of other righteous people will be equally blessed or more blessed than others, and we can use their hands or their effects to seek barakah with? just like you could use the hand of the Prophet to seek barakah, like Aisha is doing in this narration? The answer is a resounding no. No personal effects of anyone can be used to seek barakah, except for the Prophet. Notice how none of the Sahaba used the effects of Abu Bakr to seek barakah, yet he is the most worthy person in this ummah after the Prophet. And so, the next time you visit an ill person, you can certainly recite the Mu'awwadhatayn and make nafath on him with that. The next chapter, making ruqya from the evil eye and blisters and poisonous bites. The first hadith in the chapter, Abdurrahman ibn al-Aswad reports from his father, who says, I asked Aisha about the ruqya, and she replied that the Prophet gave permission to a family of the Ansar to make ruqya for every type of poisonous effect. So what this narration is talking about is that certain animals can give you a poisonous sting, such as a snake or a scorpion, even a bee. Another narration in the chapter by Aisha again, she says when a person was ill or had some injury, the Prophet would place his forefinger on the ground and lifted it up and said, Bismillah, turbatu ardina, the dust of our earth, biriqati ba'dina, with the saliva of one of us, liyushfa biha saqimuna, that one of our ill becomes healed, bi'ithni rabbina, with the permission of our Rabb. So what's happening in this narration is that the Prophet puts some of his saliva on his forefinger and then touches the dust of Al-Madinah, that is the land they were living in, and then wipes that on the injury. The saliva of the Prophet, like we said about his personal effects, does have barakah, unlike anyone else. So that's why people can become healed. Just like, for example, when Ali radiallahu anhu was complaining of an eye injury, the Prophet put his saliva on it, and he was healed. And then he gave him the flag to lead the army into war. And the narration is long and well known. Also in the chapter from Aisha again, it says that the Prophet commanded the use of ruqya to heal people from the ayn, the evil eye. Nothing much new here. We find that it is legislated to use ruqya for effects of the evil eye. The wording in the Arabic is kana ya'muru, he used to order. So it's more than just permissible, it is a recommendation. He also used to order ruqya for poisonous stings and also blisters, as Anas reports in the same chapter. So, evil eye, poisonous stings, and blisters. These are from the matters on which ruqya can be performed, though it is not the only condition. Ruqya can be performed on all types of illnesses. Also in the chapter from Salama, there was a girl in the house of Salama with some black stains on her face. The Prophet saw this and he said, Biha nadratun fastarqu laha. She has the effect of the evil eye, so seek ruqya for her. Now you'll remember what we said about the 70,000 people entering Jannah without hisab nor adhab. And these are those who did not seek the ruqya. That is to say, seek it for themselves. But you are allowed to seek it for another person, because there you're not seeking it for yourself. So you're allowed to seek ruqya for someone else, and you're also allowed to make ruqya on someone else. What is discouraged is for you to seek ruqya for yourself, if you want to be from the 70,000. Also from Jabir, he says the Prophet granted permission to the family of Hazm to make ruqya from a snake bite. And he said to Asma bint Umays, What is it that I see the children of my brother to be skinny? Are they not fed properly? She said, No, they are fed, but the evil eye hits them so quickly. And the Prophet said, Irqihim, make ruqya on them. And so Asma recited some ruqya, and the Prophet approved of it, and he says, Irqihim, yes, use this to make ruqya on them. So again, we find the permissibility in this narration of making ruqya on someone whom you suspect is the victim of the evil eye. Also from Jabir in the chapter, he says, A scorpion stung one of us when we were sitting with the Prophet. A person said, O Messenger of Allah, shall I do ruqya? And the Prophet replied, Man istata'a minkum an yanfa'a akhahu falyaf'al. Whoever is able to benefit his brother, then let him do so. Yet again, we find a simple permissibility to make a ruqya, because this is from those works by which you benefit other people, and the best of you are the ones who are most beneficial to others. The next chapter about the permissibility of ruqya as long as there is no shirk involved, from Auf ibn Malik al-Ashja'i. He says, we used to make a ruqya in the days of Jahiliyyah, and we asked the Prophet, O Messenger of Allah, what is your opinion on this matter of ruqya? And the Prophet said, اعرضوا علي رقاكم لا بأس بالرقى ما لم يكن فيه شرك. Let me know or inform me about these ruqya that you do, there is no problem with ruqya as long as there is no shirk involved in it. We mentioned some of the conditions of the ruqya, and from them is that there must be no shirk involved in it. It must be in a language which is understood, and it must use the names and attributes of Allah Jalla wa Ala. So it must be based on tawheed, because the ruqya in the days of Jahiliyyah was based upon shirk. The next chapter about the permissibility of taking a wage or some monetary recompense for making ruqya. Abu Sa'id al-Khudri reports. He says some companions set out on a journey, and they happened to pass by a tribe. They asked for hospitality, but the tribe refused. That night their chief was stung by a scorpion, and one of them came to the companion and said, "Is there any raqi amongst you, one who can make ruqya?" One of the companions said, "Yes, but we will charge you, because you did not provide us hospitality." So they agreed, and the companion recited al-Fatiha, and the leader was healed. As a payment they were given a flock of sheep. The raqi wanted to make sure about this earning, is it halal or not, so they decided to ask the Prophet. He mentioned to the Prophet then that he made ruqya using al-Fatiha, and the Prophet smiled and said, "Ma adraka annaha ruqya?" How did you know that it is a ruqya? The Prophet said, "Yes, take the flock of sheep and spare me a share." We take from this narration that al-Fatiha is a ruqya for those who are stung by a scorpion or for any illness. So if you visit the ill, you can recite al-Fatiha on him, make nafath. And previously we said you can do this with the mu'awwidhatayn. In fact, you can do this with any ayat of the Quran, or that which is reported in the hadith, this is the best way, or any means by which you make dua using the names and attributes of Allah Jalla wa Ala. This is all fine. When making ruqya, both the raqi and the marqi both need to have iman that Allah Jalla wa Ala will produce the healing through the sabab of the ruqya, that the ruqya itself does not heal, but rather Allah Jalla wa Ala heals through this sabab. They need to have positive iman. As if the ruqya does not work, it does not mean that the ruqya does not work, it simply means that the raqi or the marqi are not working. That is to say, they do not have the iman necessary. Imagine you having the sharpest and strongest sword in your hand. It is completely useless if your hand is shaking and you're unable to use the sword properly. It is not going to cut anything nor attack anyone. So it's not the sword's fault, it is your fault for not being skilled and not being determined in attacking the enemy with the sword. So the ruqya is the sword. Now, it would depend on who is holding it. Is he skilled? Is he determined or not? So if a person makes a ruqya and he's thinking to himself, well, let me try this ruqya, see if it works or not, then we say, no, this is not the mindset of the raqi. The mindset of the raqi is that he has determination that the ruqya is going to benefit by the will of Allah Jalla wa Ala. So when you strike with the sword, how determined are you to overcome your enemy? That's the question. Okay, we also learned that you're allowed to take a recompense for your service of ruqya. The Prophet ﷺ said in a wording of the narration, "Inna ahaqqa ma akhadhtum alayhi ajran kitabullah." The most worthy thing for you to take a reward for is the Book of Allah. Just like it is permissible to teach the Quran as a mahar for your wife. And the evidence for that is the well-known narration in the Sahihain. We take from the hadith that you ought to be careful about your earning and make sure it is halal. This is exactly what the companions did. So they did not accept the payment, they made tawaqquf, they just refrained from making a decision until the Prophet gave them the green light. Just compare this fear of Allah to many Muslims nowadays who simply do not care. They just want the highest paid job. Halal or haram, it does not matter. Haram earning is one of the strong means by which a dua is prevented from being answered. As in the hadith about the man on a long journey, dusty, with disheveled hair. Not enjoining the good and forbidding the evil is also from the ways in which your dua is not answered, as the Prophet ﷺ informed us. We also find from the narration the good character of the Prophet in that he asked for a share of this flock of sheep. How is this good character? It certainly is because if he does this, the companions' hearts will be at rest that this is halal. If the Prophet is sharing with us. Sure, the Prophet gave them the verbal permission, but actions speak louder than words, and it will put the hearts of the companions at rest more effectively. Okay, let us take the next chapter, the recommendation of placing your hand on the place of the pain when making dua. From Uthman al-Thaqafi, he complained of pain to the Prophet when he had embraced Islam, and the Prophet instructed him, "Da' yadaka على الذي تألم من جسدك." place your hand on the place of pain on your body. وَقُلْ بِسْمِ اللَّهِ ثَلَاثًا وَقُلْ سَبْعَ مَرَّاتٍ أَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ وَقُدْرَتِهِ مِنْ شَرِّ مَا أَجِدُ وَأُحَاذِرُ. Then say Bismillah 3 times. Thereafter say 7 times, I seek refuge in Allah and His ability from the evil of what I find and fear. From this narration we find that if there is a part of your body which is in pain, then put your hand on it and follow the instructions of this hadith. And one ought to say this in Arabic if possible, because the meaning can never be 100% in a translation. The next chapter about seeking refuge against shaitan from the whispers in the salah. From Uthman ibn Abil As, he said to the Prophet that the shaitan intervenes between me and the prayer and my recitation of the Quran, and he confuses me. Thereupon the Prophet said, ذَاكَ شَيْطَانٌ يُقَالُ لَهُ خِنْزَبٌ. This is shaitan whose name is Khinzab. فَإِذَا أَحْسَسْتَهُ فَتَعَوَّذْ بِاللَّهِ مِنْهُ وَاتْفُلْ عَلَى يَسَارِكَ ثَلَاثًا. So when you feel that he is present, then seek refuge in Allah from him and spit 3 times on your left. He says, I did so and Allah took this shaitan away. From this narration we find that this shaitan has a particular name, Khinzab, and he comes and confuses you in the salah. And we find the valuable lesson that when you find wasawis, whispers in your salah, thinking about worldly affairs, or even thinking about shar'i affairs in your salah, for example rulings of fiqh or aqidah and so on, still this is a distraction and can be from shaitan. So you must seek refuge in Allah from shaitan and spit on the left hand side, dry spits. And especially if you are in a congregation, do it in a way which will not disturb the person standing to your left, so be considerate. The next chapter, for every disease there is a cure. From Jabir, the Prophet said, لِكُلِّ دَاءٍ دَوَاءٍ فَإِذَا أُصِيبَ دَوَاءُ الدَّاءِ بَرَأَ بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ. There is a remedy for every malady, and when the remedy is applied to the disease, it is cured with the permission of Allah Azza wa Jal. In this hadith there is the permission of taking the medication, because the medication, the dawa, is spoken of in a positive context. Note how he says that the illness is cured with the permission of Allah Jalla wa Ala, because He is the one who cures. The dawa, the medication, is a cause. Also from Jabir, he visited a man called Muqanna who was ill, and he told him, I will not go away unless you get yourself cupped, for I heard the Prophet saying that it is a remedy. So in this there's a permissibility of getting yourself cupped if it will prove to be beneficial. Also in the chapter from Jabir that the Prophet said, إن كان في شيء من أدويتكم خير ففي شرطة محجم أو شربة من عسل أو لذعة بنار وما أحب أن أكتوي. If there is any goodness in your medication, then it is in 3 things. The incision made by the cupper, a drink of honey, and branding yourself with fire, but I do not like to be cauterized. So in this narration, 3 items are mentioned: cupping and drinking honey. There is no doubt that there is a healing in this. The Quran testifies to the healing nature of the honey. فِيهِ شِفَاءٌ لِلنَّاسِ. As for branding with the fire, then the Prophet had this done to Sa'ad ibn Mu'adh, and he approved of it, meaning to say it was permissible. However, it is discouraged because of the pain that it can cause. So the Prophet said, I do not like to be cauterized. In another narration, Jabir reports that the Prophet sent a physician to Ubay ibn Ka'ab. He cut the vein and cauterized it. So this is evidence that cauterization, or the ladh'atun bin nar, is permissible, but not recommended due to the harm and pain it can cause. But it is permissible due to the Prophet sending the physician to Ubay ibn Ka'ab. And the reason for this, as is explained in another narration, is that he was injured by an arrow. Also in the chapter from Jabir again, that Sa'ad ibn Mu'adh was wounded by an arrow in his vein. Here the Prophet himself cauterized it with a rod, and his arm became swollen, and so the Prophet did it for a 2nd time. So again, proving that cauterization is permissible, we have 2 narrations. One where he sent a doctor to Ubay ibn Ka'ab, and another narration where he himself did it to Sa'ad ibn Mu'adh. Also in the chapter from Ibn Umar, the Prophet said, Al-Humma min fayhi jahannam fa'abriduha bil-ma'. The fever is from the raging of the heat of the fire, so cool it down with water. And we find this happening nowadays when a person has fever, you often find him putting an ice pack on his forehead because he's heating up from inside, and you simply combat or battle this heat by cooling it down with something cold like an ice pack. Note here that medication is not like ibadah, so you can have innovation in medication, whereas you cannot have innovation in ibadah. For every time and a place there is an appropriate medication. So the idea of medication is simply very flexible. So one should not think that we must just restrict ourselves to the medication that the Prophet used to practice. No, the Prophet would practice the best medication available to him during his time and place. That means, wherever you may be, the sunnah is to take the best medication available to you in your time and place, as long as the medication per se is halal. Just a few more points of benefit. In the ruqyah, you can recite what you're reciting and then blow in your hands with a little spittle and then wipe it over your body. This is what you would do before going to sleep, and is permissible to be done in any ruqyah. And many ulama say that if you wipe it with the right hand, then this is better, because the right hand side is used for goodly things, of course. Also note that the ruqyah must be in the name of Allah Jalla wa Ala, so that is using His names or His attributes or some ayat of the Quran or something narrated from the Sunnah. That is better. But at the minimum, it must use the name of Allah Jalla wa Ala. Does it have to be in Arabic? Preferably you use what has been narrated, but the matter is more flexible. It is permissible to be not in Arabic, but it must be in a language which is understood and devoid of any shirk. Some scholars said that ruqyah can only be done after the affliction, and this is not correct. We have evidence to tell us that ruqyah can be done before the affliction. For example, reciting the Mu'awwidhatayn and Surah Al-Ikhlas and blowing it on yourself before you go to sleep, that is before any affliction. Likewise, the Prophet ﷺ used to do ruqyah on Hassan and Hussein, and that is clearly before any affliction. He would say, أعوذ بكلمات الله التامة من كل شيطان وهامة ومن كل عين لامة. That is in Al-Bukhari. Likewise, authentically in At-Tirmidhi, when he would stay and settle down at a place during his travels, he would say, أعوذ بكلمات الله التامات من شر ما خلق. I seek refuge with the perfect words of Allah from the evil of what He has created. So again, this is seeking refuge before any affliction has taken place, not after. And so such is ruqyah. It can be done before the affliction, not necessarily afterwards. Can a kafir make ruqyah on a Muslim or vice versa? The answer is yes. As long as the conditions are met, that both parties believe that Allah Jalla wa Ala is the one who brings about the healing, and that the ruqyah is merely a means, just like a medicine, which is a means, and that there is no shirk involved in the ruqyah. It is done using the names and attributes of Allah Jalla wa Ala, and it is done in a language which is understood, so there are no doubts about what is being said. Then all of this is permissible. Okay, what about other than a verbal ruqyah? For example, people may write down some ayat of the Quran in a locket and wear it around the neck. This has been reported by some of the Sahaba. Likewise, you may write down some ayat of the Quran and then wash that paper, and using that water with which these ayat have been washed, you may drink it or wash yourself with it. Or for example, you may recite some ruqyah and then blow it in some water, and then this water is drunk by the one who is afflicted. What about these types of affairs? The Prophet has not reported to us anything about this matter. The only thing we do know is the verbal ruqyah, which we have seen in these narrations. As for these other affairs, they have been practiced by some of the early Muslims. So clearly, some of them thought that it was okay. So based on that, if someone were to practice this, then we would not object. But one would then need to be careful if he's wearing a locket, that he does not enter, let's say, the lavatory with this locket, and it could be exposed to humiliation. So there is an objection from that angle, which would justify us in saying that one ought not to wear such a thing, especially as it has not been narrated from the Prophet. And this is the opinion which we would incline to. Do not wear such lockets or necklaces or whatever else. The best thing for you to do, practically speaking, is what we have known from the marfu' ahadith, which are the verbal ruqyah. along with the nafath, which is the blowing with light spittle and rubbing it on your body, or perhaps touching the ailing part of the body and reciting the ruqyah. All of this has been narrated authentically in the Sahih. Also, the Prophet saying that the fever is from the raging heat of Jahannam. Why would he say this? It's like saying that this fever is giving you just a minor taster of what it is like to be in Jahannam, when you feel hot and you're suffering and you're in pain, and that type of a thing. Let us take some review questions. So question number 1. The Prophet told Salama to seek ruqyah for this little girl in her house who had some black marks on her face. So how do you square this narration with the narration of the 70,000 who did not seek ruqyah? Question number 2. Can you take a wage for making ruqyah on someone? Give the evidence for this. Question number 3. What are the conditions for a ruqyah to be valid? And do these conditions also apply to a kafir making ruqyah on a Muslim?